The Democratic Party, one of the two major political hierarchies in the United States, has seen significant changes since its inception in the early 1800s. The evolution of the Democrat is a reflection of larger shifts in American ideal politics and culture. Let's explore the subject in further detail and look at the history of the Democratic Party, highlighting key shifts and turning points. The Democratic Party grew from the Democratic Republican Party, which was formed in early 1790s by James Madison and Thomas Jefferson. This party opposed the Federalist Party, which favored a powerful national government and a national banking system. On the other hand, the Democratic Republicans favored state sovereignty and a small federal government. At this time, the Democratic Republican Party was sympathetic to interests of the Southern and Western people, who were mostly farmers, and opposed to those interests of the North, where the economic and industrial interests were strong. Unlike the Federalists, who supported an elite's power, then came about the idea of average persons' involvement in the government. They laid the groundwork for individual liberty and populism, on which the later Democratic Party was to rest. Today's Democratic Party was officially established in 1828, with supporters of Andrew Jackson as the first president of the party. Jackson's presidency marked the beginning of the Jacksonian democracy, which emphasized the common man's rights and opposed any form of aristocracy. The party during this period supported expansion to the western frontier and opposed a national bank. Andrew Jackson's leadership style and ideas made a big impact on the Democratic Party's identity. It was not accepted so widely, but his choices to support the Indian Removal Act and resist the Second Bank of the United States reflected his populist ambitions. Many Americans found resonance in Jackson's appeal to the common man and his mistrust of established elites, which strengthened the Democratic Party's support among laborers and frontier settlers. There were several problems for the Democratic parties in Civil War and Reconstruction eras. Divisions developed on the issues among the party as the Northern Democrats opposed the spread of slavery into new areas, and the Southern Democrats supported it. It wound up being a key element for Republican candidates Abraham Lincoln's 1860s elections. Following the Civil War, the Democrats Party was linked to the Solid South, where it backed segregationist policies and opposed Reconstruction. The party standing as a supporter of racial supremacy and states' rights was commended during this time. Racial divisions were further cemented, and civil rights advancement was postponed for decades because of the Democrats' resistance to Reconstruction measures, which sought to integrate freed slaves into American society. Long-lasting effects of the party's position during this time were shown in its policies and support base well in 20th centuries. This era's impact is complicated because it emphasizes the party's battle with racial and equality concerns, which would later play a major role in its program. In the early 20th century, the Democratic Party experienced vast ideological changes. Leaders like William Jennings Bryan promoted progressive changes, including antitrust laws and labor rights. Although Bryan lost 3 presidential elections, his ideas dominated the party program, which concentrated more on social justice and government's economic intervention. One of the best examples of the Democratic Party's shifts toward addressing economic injustice and supporting the working class was Bryan's well-known Cross of Gold speech and endorsements of free silver campaign.
Mr. Carlyle said in 1878 that this was a struggle between the idle holders of idle capital and the struggling masses who produce the wealth and pay the taxes of the country.
The progressive movements rose to prominence during this period in an effort to address the social and economic issues brought on by industrialization. The Democrats passed progressive laws that addressed concerns such as food safety, child labor, and women's suffrage. The progressive era signaled a dramatic shift from the party's prior emphasis on states' rights and limited governments to a more active role for the federal government in social issues and economy regulations. The 1930s Great Depression was good for Democratic Party as it allowed party leaders to restructure the party. The New Deal, a collection of measures intended to promote social change and economic recovery, was started by Franklin D. Roosevelt. These periods marked the beginning of Democrat Party's dominance in American politics, with a coalition consisting of urban voters, minorities, and labor organizations. Roosevelt's New Deal initiatives, such as the Civilian Conservation Corps (CCC), Works Progress Administration (WPA), and Social Security, were intended to help the unemployed, boost economic growth, and system revamp the structure of the financial system so downturn could be avoided. These programs fundamentally changed the relationship between the federal government and its citizens by expanding the government's economic roles and establishing a social safety net. As Roosevelt had an inclusive policy, so many ethnic groups such as African Americans and other demographics began deserting from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party. This alliance was influenced by American politics and policy well into the middle of 20th century and helped keep the Democratic Party in political control for many decades. The Democratic Party's civil rights movements turned a corner in the mid-20th century. The realignment of party allegiance of set by President Lyndon B. Johnson's support of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and Civil Rights Acts of 1964 alienated many Southern Democrats. The Republican Party had its great rise in South, and at the same time, the Democratic Party began increasingly tied up with civil rights and social justice. John's Great Society initiative sought to address racial inequality and poverty, further tying the Democratic Party to progressive social ideals. At the end of Reconstruction, it turned suddenly around and became a new voice of civil rights legislation. White Southern voters who felt alienated by the party's new course significantly reduced their support for the realignment, which was not without its difficulties. Despite all the problems, the Democratic Party's dedication to social injustice and civil rights won new support among women, young people, and African Americans, who were vital to the party's success in electoral terms in second half of 20th century. After the late 20s and early 21st centuries, the Democratic Party grew in formation. The Bill Clinton administration came out in the 1990s with early shift of policy towards centrist policies and brought in economic growth and welfare reform. As Clinton promoted the third way, trying to reconcile traditional Democrats' values with markets-oriented policies, he produced massive legislation, including NAFTA and welfare reform. The Monica Lewinsky scandal and the contentious 2000 presidential election that showed the country's political divisions were among the party's challenges. However, the Democratic Party continued to adopt. Barack Obama's election in 2008 brought the Democratic Party to a turning point as the first African American president since the party's establishment, using his administration to both strengthen the party's contemporary identity and strengthen himself. Obama concentrated on healthcare reform, economy recovery, and progressive social objectives. However, the historical Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, has provided healthcare access to millions of Americans and has also, in later elections, been a major campaign issue. Obama's presidency also saw significant advantages in LGBTQ plus rights, including the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell legislation of same-sex marriage. The 21st Century Democratic Party was decidedly pro-social justice and pro-equality, and these were achievements. In 2020, even in a very split political atmosphere, Joe Biden became a definitive Democratic politician and won the presidency during Biden's administration. Its priorities have remained focused on COVID-19 and economy recovery, climate change, and his presidency today is the party's current views, a strong federal government and progressive social views. Measures including within Biden's legislative agenda are measures to increase social safety nets, fight climate change through the Build Back Better plan, and spend heavily on infrastructure. And his admin systematic racism and advancing equity in all sphere of social have also been the highest priorities. The Democratic Party under Biden is still negotiating a very fragmented political landscape with ongoing debates over issues like voting rights, immigration, and healthcare. The party's future prosperity will depend on its capacity to handle these issues and preserve a wide coalition. The media has become the power behind how the public views the Democratic Party in past few decades. In the age of social media, round-the-clock, digital platforms, and news cycles, how people listen and share political messages has changed. The way the media writes about a party can make voters less likely to vote for it. It helps in daily life to discredit the party's failures or to celebrate its successes. The Democratic Party has had to build complex way of communicating in fitting to this new media environments. Part of this is a modality by which uses social media channels to directly communicate to voters, address misinformation, and push its policy agenda. That's why Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Barack Obama have both been successful in using social media to expand their audiences and create the personal identity around which they will base their campaigns. However, there are drawbacks to the media environments as well. Information silos and increased political polarization can result from growth of echo chambers and biased news sources. To effectively convey its message and attract a broad electorate, the Democratic Party needs to manage this complication. In a rapidly evolving political landscape, the Democratic Party faces new opportunities as well as challenges. As long as the party adjusts to these developments while retaining its basis principle, its success in the future will largely depend on such factors. In recent years, the Democratic Party has become actively focused on social justice, healthcare, and climate change. The wide coalition of supports around the party includes young voters, minorities, and progressive activists who have been attracted to the party because its promises to dig in, tackle systematic injustices, and push forward with inclusive policies. The party's electoral performance and capacity to carry out its policy program depend on its wide base of supports. In the future, the Democratic Party will have to deal with a very divided political landscape. It would include large rifts, both within its own ranks and between the two major parties. One of the main challenges will be striking a balance between the demands of its progressive side and the requirements to win over moderate and independent votes. To remain relevant and successful, the party must also keep addressing urgent problems like voting rights, immigration reform, and economic inequality. you.